I'm just going to talk a little bit about how the novel developed over many years, and I'm going to do it through the lens of three of the different characters in the story. There are actually 5 point of view characters in the novel, but 2 of them are sort of minor, so I'm not going to touch on them. So this is a novel that that I worked on for about 8 years in development, but I think it's kind of fun to talk about how the story developed and how the novel developed over that whole time. One of the things that I actually worked on it so long that I forgot a lot of this, and it's been fun over the last month to just discover it. So the entry point into the novel for me was, do you guys remember the Clark Rockefeller case? That was about 10 years ago. So Clark Rockefeller was this guy who pretended to be a member of the Rockefeller family, and then he married this wealthy woman. They had a child together, and then of course it turned out he was not a member of the Rockefeller family. He was actually this guy from Germany, and he had murdered a bunch of people. So he went on the run with his daughter. Anyway, it was kind of fun. So not for those people, but yeah. So anyway, so he went on the run, and I tried writing some other things, and I was like, I'd actually had this other novel that I'd shopped around, and it hadn't gone anywhere. I got an agent, but it just didn't go anywhere. Nobody wanted it, and I got discouraged. I started focusing on some other things, but I saw that story, and I thought, I always wanted to be a writer. I'm going to write something. So I wrote this scene. It was probably, I don't know, maybe 2.5 pages long. And it was about this guy named Sam, and I knew he was leaving something, and but I didn't know what he was leaving, but I knew he had done something bad, and he was leaving town. And I thought it was great. And it sat on my computer, and I would pull it up every now and then, and I would read it, and I'd think, that is terrific. And then I'd put it away. And I wouldn't quite know what to do with it. So then, in 2010, I got a new job, and I managed to negotiate a month off in between the 2 jobs starting. I still have a day job. And I thought, well, I've always wanted to travel, do something fun, or I could just sit around. I could sit in my house for a month and try and write a novel. So I thought, I'm going to try that. So I pulled up that scene. And for some reason, I thought you could write a novel in a month, which turned out not to be true. So I pulled up that scene, and I thought, this guy is interesting, but he really needs a foil. He needs someone who can sort of match him, match his wits. So I came up with this character. I named her, because I name characters very quickly when I'm writing. I knew she was a woman. That's really all I knew about her. And I knew she had a child, and so I was naming very quickly, and so I thought, I'm going to call them, this is like so pretentious, I'm going to call them Hester and Pearl, after Scarlet Letter. And then the next day, because that was so pretentious, I changed Pearl's name very quickly. First I changed it to Chloe, and then I later changed it to Kate. So now it's Hester and Kate, but I did like the name Hester. And I knew that I sort of played around with what her different her professions could be. And I at first the novel was going to be a little bit lighter than it wound up being. It wound up being sort of a dark novel. But I thought for a while I was going to, because she likes movies a lot, I was going to name her. I was going to name the book His Girl Thursby, sort of after His Girl Friday. So I named her Hester Thursby, and for some reason that just stuck. I just really liked that name. And then I sort of started developing the characters a little bit more, and the thing that really helped me determine, give me that entryway into who Hester was her living situation. So she has a longtime boyfriend, a longtime partner. She calls him her non-husband, and they live in a 3-apartment house, and they keep their own apartments. And I loved that detail about them. Lots of people do this, but I thought it was a neat detail about them that they keep their own apartments and they live somewhat separately. And then I further developed that by making them have a lot of contrast, like basic things, like he is really messy. I mean, he's really neat, sorry, and she is like the biggest slob in the world. She watches movies all the time. She loves She loves movies about women who overcome extraordinary things, but not in a pretentious way. She loves things like Alien. She loves things like Halloween, Mildred Pierce, like things about people who are overcoming something that's very difficult. And she watches them up, and she lives in this tiny little apartment, really low ceilings, and she watches them on this ancient little TV with a VCR, not even a DVD player. So like she goes around to, this all got cut out of the novel, but she goes around to yard sales and like finds old VHS tapes to watch. So I'm just going to read a couple. It's not even. It's a little, maybe a page and a half. And this is the entry. This is the introduction of Hester. So it's just the very beginning of the book. So all Hester Thursby wanted was a single day to herself, and today was going to be that day, even if it killed her. She left the baby monitor on the nightstand next to her snoring non-husband Morgan and slipped out of the house with Waffles on the leash. Okay, maybe she glanced into Kate's bedroom to be sure her 3-year-old niece was still alive. Maybe she crept up to the queen-size bed where the tiny girl slept within a protective barricade of stuffed animals. And maybe Hester felt a wave of relief when Kate rubbed her nose with a fist and rolled over. Kate had been staying with them since September, and no matter how much Hester wanted to keep the kid from cramping her style, she still hadn't adjusted to worrying about another human being all day and every day. We're making this up as we go along, kid, she whispered, kissing Kate's forehead. Outside was quiet and dark in the way only a frigid morning in December could be. Today was Morgan's day to watch Kate, the first free time Hester had had in nearly 3 months. She took the dog straight to Block 11 in Somerville's Union Square, where she ordered the biggest cup of coffee available and a scone to split with the Basset Hound. She added cream and 7 sugars to the coffee. That always gets a laugh, which I love. At the park, she let Waffles off the leash to have at it with the other dogs and then planned her day. Maybe she'd hit the Brattle Theater for that George Romero series, or wander the streets of Cambridge, or drink till she was drunk. Maybe she'd do all 3. You're off somewhere. Hester glanced up at Prachi, O'Keefe the greyhound's mom, who loomed over her, even some 10-year-olds loomed over Hester. Just daydreaming, Hester said. We missed you last night, Prachi said. Prachi threw an early winter party each year, one where guests spilled into every room and the air smelled of curry instead of cloves. It was an event Hester looked forward to, but the party hadn't started till 8, which had meant 9, well after Kate's bedtime. Finding a babysitter on a Friday in December is next to impossible, Hester said. Who knew? Darling, you can still hit the town, Prachi said. It's not like you died. We all love Kate. I'm learning how to do this as I go along. Turns out there's no manual on raising someone else's kid. Any word from Daphne? Nada, Hester said. Daphne was Kate's mother and Morgan's twin sister. She was also Hester's best friend. Hester had known her since college, long before Daphne had introduced her to Morgan. 3 months earlier, in September, Daphne had skipped town while Hester and Morgan had been out to dinner with Prachi. The 3 of them had come home, drunk and ready for a nightcap, only to find Kate asleep with a note beside her. On it, Daphne had written in block letters, "Back in an hour, tops." They hadn't heard from her since. So that was the premise for the whole story. Well, not for the whole story, but sort of the drama of Hester's personal life. She and her partner, Morgan, have this child who they don't necessarily want, that they're responsible for. Morgan and Daphne are twins, and Hester and Daphne are best friends, and so they care for this child. And Hester, one of the things that Hester's learning as the story goes along is not only how to hunt serial killers, but also not to do it with this 3-year-old child in tow, which is something that she sort of learns as the story goes along. So that was fun. So that was my entry point into really starting to develop the story. But I still had Sam, right? So Sam is this character who, does anyone know someone who is really handsome and charming and can get away with anything? Like they like live by this other set of rules. So when I came up with Sam, I think everyone has a friend like that. So I was like, okay, what if you also were a serial killer on top of that? Like, what could you get away with there? So, just like Clark Rockefeller, Sam knows how to tell lies. He knows how to get his way into these people's lives. And most importantly, he knows when to get out. So There's a long back history behind Sam when we meet him, but he's done this before. It's touched on through the novel. With backstory, one thing about backstory when you're writing a novel is you want to make sure only to include as much as you need to, because it can really drag down a story. So anyway, Sam really knows how to enter these people's lives, and so when Hester, she runs this side business where she finds people. So she's hired by Sam's sister to find him. He's been gone for 10 years. The thing about people who are gone today, and one of the interesting things about writing this novel, even over the 8 to 10 years that I wrote it, is that the information about us, the information about people, about citizens, is so much more in 2008 than it was even in 2010 or 2008. So this premise of a librarian, Hester's a librarian at Harvard's Widener Library, this premise, I kept having to adapt it as it went along, right? Because like if you wanted to disappear right now, you'd really have to work at it. I mean, like really hard. So like anyone who has gone and disappeared at this point in our lives really wants to be gone. So Hester goes to find this guy, and guess what? He doesn't want to be found. And that's sort of the premise of the novel isn't about the act of Hester finding Sam. It's actually about the aftermath of what happens when someone does find someone who doesn't really want to be found. So now I'm just going to read a quick scene. This is from Sam's point of view. So the novel is probably about, I once mapped this out and I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's probably told from about 40% Hester's point of view, 30% Sam's point of view, 20% another character who I'm going to get to in a sec, and then two remaining characters. But so Sam has a pretty strong presence in the story. Okay. So Sam Blaine stepped out of the Park Street T station in downtown Boston. The winter light had faded and the air was heavy with pending snow. Sam tucked his plaid scarf into his collar, buttoned up the peacoat he'd stolen from the back of a chair in a coffee shop, and headed into the Boston Common. All around him, elms and maples were lit up with long strands of looping white lights. On the frog pond, skaters glided in a circle. He crossed into Beacon Hill with its gold-domed Capitol building, where gas lamps bathed the narrow cobblestone streets in a warm glow. He wandered till he found himself in Louisburg Square again. He stood in the shadows across the green from the Richardsons' house. Sam had come to this square a few times over the past months, ever since he'd met Wendy Richards at a benefit where he'd worked an evening as a catering waiter. He'd observed her more than he met her, the way she moved through the room, confident in a black cocktail dress, towering over nearly everyone else at the party. She'd slipped him a $100 bill at the end of the night for keeping the wine flowing. "I can't make it through these things without it," she whispered. It had been easy enough to find her house, and since then he'd come to watch how she lived, and she lived well, in a way Sam could only dream of, in a way that he had dreamed of. She had cars and clothes and knew people Sam wanted to know. She belonged to the University Club and golfed in Brookline and went to Nantucket for the weekend. Here, tonight, he could see her on the second floor looking out into the darkness, the glow of a fire lighting the room behind her. She must have plans. She had to. It was a Saturday in December, and people like Wendy didn't stay home with Netflix when there were parties to go to, and everywhere Sam looked, another party was starting. Couples alit from taxis and Brooks Brothers in velvet with expensive gifts from expensive stores wrapped in expensive red and gold paper. He could have felt like the little match girl wandering in the cold. He could have felt put out, but this was where Sam belonged. All he needed was a way in. All he needed was one small chance. He wasn't sure how long he'd been standing in the shadows when the front door to the mansion opened. From across the street, he recognized Wendy's athletic frame as the butler helped her into her coat. Her dark hair was wound around in a sort of cone that threatened to topple her over. She clutched at a gift and hurried down the stairs and onto the sidewalk, her heels clacking against the brick. Sam followed, stepping lightly between shadows so as not to be heard. The street, so full of energy before, suddenly felt empty. It was cold, and Wendy pulled her coat in close. Her feet moved so quickly she practically ran. Still, Sam nearly got close enough to smell her perfume. She came to another house and another set of stairs where Sam could see a holiday party in full swing through the parlor windows. She climbed halfway to the door and turned. The light from over the doorway silhouetted her pale face. "Who's there?" she said. Sam stepped into an alley. He'd have to be less eager in the future. "I can hear you," Wendy said. "I can hear you breathe." So that's that's the introduction to Sam. Does he seem like someone you'd want to get to know? And then the third character, this was another interesting thing that happened as I developed the story. When I first started writing the story, I wrote it all in first person as opposed to third person. So once I had sort of worked out that Hester was the character. So I wrote everything through Hester's point of view, which was good because it helped me get really close to her as a character, and that's important since she's the protagonist of this story. And then after I'd finished the draft, I mean, one thing you have to know about a first novel is literally no one is waiting for it. No one cares that you're doing this. So you don't have an editor, you don't have an agent, you don't have an audience, you don't have anything. So any kind of motivation has to be internal. It really has to be ready when it goes out. And so I could fiddle with this thing as much as I wanted to. I could change it as much as I wanted to. And so I did change it quite a bit throughout the writing process. So once I had finished that first draft, I kind of looked at it and I was like, I didn't like the first person, first of all. It didn't ring authentic for me, so I wanted to change the whole thing to third person. And then I kind of wanted to pull out characters. It was obvious that Sam needed to be pulled out as a character and given some point of view scenes because I just felt like it was important to hear from him. But there was another character that was only in one scene in that first draft. This guy named, I think his name was Gabe from the beginning. I don't think he had a last name at the beginning. So this guy named Gabe was just kind of interesting. He was in this, frankly, very violent scene that that happened at the very beginning of the book. That scene wound up moving into the middle of the book, but. I thought, let's try and give him a couple of scenes and see what happens with him. I'll read a little scene. He's a little unpleasant at the beginning, and one of the things I liked about the development of this novel and the development of that character was, for me, he sort of turned into the heart of the novel in a way. He's the character who changes the most for me. He goes from someone who it seems very lost, who seems very disconnected from the world, and he changes in the novel in a way that I think he and Hester certainly find a strange bond at the end of the novel. When I decided to make him a point of view character, one of the things I did was I wanted you as the reader, when you're reading this, to feel very distant from him. And so one of the tools I used, or tricks, it's more of a trick, is I wrote everything through narrative discourse, which is when someone says something in the text, instead of saying, Gabe said, I'm going to the store, in quotes, you say, you describe what he said. So Gabe was talking about going to the store. And so whenever he was engaging with someone, like Hester would have lines of dialogue that she said, and then Gabe's responses would just be described in the narrative. I wound up changing that, but I only, as I drafted, I only pulled out the very most necessary pieces of dialogue so that you would still sort of feel a little bit of distance, especially at the beginning, because I don't want you to be, I don't want you to have an alliance with Gabe at the very beginning of the story. And then as I got toward the end, I would start pulling out more of that dialogue so that you would feel more of a connection to him. So I'm going to read a really quick scene with Gabe. Do people mind swear words? You're okay with it? Okay. I just cut one out in the last reading, but I thought I'd gift this to you. So Gabe DiPercio, this is also the first scene where you see him as a point of view. This is the first scene you see him, period. But it's also his first scene as a point of view character. So Gabe DiPercio didn't want much out of life besides to belong somewhere, anywhere, and to have someone love him and to love someone, and to have a family and kids, a house, a dog, to be ordinary in every way. Loving someone, at least, was easy, too easy at times, as Sam often told him. Gabe was in love right now, so in love that he'd left his computer for once and braved the cold to stand outside the Somerville Theater in Davis Square and watch the girl working the concession stand. He loved the way she moved deftly from the popcorn machine to the soda fountain, the way she wore that baby doll dress that seemed too thin for a day like today. She ladled extra butter on popcorn for anyone, even those who didn't ask. He'd seen her for the first time 2 weeks ago when he'd come for a midnight showing of Back to the Future. I love this movie, she'd said as she handed him a ticket. Me too, Gabe had said. At least he wished he had. Instead, he'd stared at her till she asked if he needed anything else. So today, he practiced what to say. Are you going to the Girly Man show next week? Or, it sure is cold outside. Ordinary things. Things that anyone could say and that wouldn't make him stand out. No matter what, he wouldn't tell her that he knew her name and where she lived or that her roommate left for work at 8:13 on the dot every weekday morning. He wouldn't mention the spare key he'd found hidden under the porch either. Maybe he'd ask for snow caps. He definitely wouldn't tell her that he liked her tits. So those are the three characters, and they spend the novel sort of interacting with each other. And for me, this novel is really it's about family and about finding your place in this world. And each of them in their own way, as the novel goes through, some in different ways than others. They sort of find their place in each other's worlds and how they might interact with each other in that world. Let me pause there and see if people have questions, if there's anything that you're curious about. Yes?
So you started with the characters and you gave a story, and then looked for a story for the characters. Yes?
Yeah.
Or did you have a story that you wanted to tell?
A couple things. I mean, this has been one of the, again, because I've been talking about this a lot, it's been interesting to remember the entire process. Because if I were to say to myself today, you're gonna spend 10 years doing this weird thing where you just follow this like random path and finally and there might be something at the end of it. I don't know if I could actually do it. But when I first started, that scene that I talked about, the one that I wrote that I used to admire on my computer, what page do you think it's on? It's not in the book at all. I totally cut it. I always look at that scene as sort of it was my gateway to finding Hester, who is this really interesting character. She's a character who, it can be hard to find a character that's strong enough to hold a series. This is a series, there'll be a second book coming out next year. And that scene wound up, I mean, I clung to that scene for the longest time because I liked it. It was something that I had valued, but ultimately I just realized that it had to go because it wasn't pushing the story anywhere. It was sort of like you got to it and you were like, why is this still here? Anyway, so the original story that I wrote was about do you know what a for-profit college is? A for-profit university? It's like the University of Phoenix. So the original story involved this family. I used to have this really weird job for like 4 months when I was much younger at a for-profit college in another city. And it was like the weirdest place you've ever been in your whole life. It was owned by a family. The president of the school was the daughter of the chairman of the board. And I worked for his mistress. And the daughter hated the mistress. Like her whole life was making sure that mistress's life was terrible. And I always thought, I left that after my grand 4 months there, and I thought that would make a great novel. So the whole first draft had another point of view character named Maxine, who was basically this woman who I used to work for, the mistress of the owner of the school. I got an agent. So that book I wrote. I loved that storyline. I loved that character. I got an agent, the same agent I still have, when you're selling fiction, the first step is you have to find an agent. And then you step back and your agent does all of the business dealings for you. So I got this agent. We submitted it all over New York. This was in 2015. We submitted it all over New York, and it got rejected absolutely everywhere. And I had another book that had been rejected everywhere too, about, I guess that would have been about 13 years earlier. And it had been really discouraging. And so I got to this point where I was like, I can either be discouraged and give up on this again, or I can just try and tackle this. I work in my day job. I'm the editorial director at a publisher, so I definitely have some editorial experience. So one of the things that I was able to do then, this is a really long answer to your question, sorry.
As long as it answers it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was really able to do was take the editorial, the rejection letters that I would get from all of these editors, and I was able to analyze them and really figure out what was wrong with the novel. The thing that was wrong was the character, right? So Maxine, there was the storyline actually, so Maxine just couldn't be there. So I pulled that out, and that's where I think the characters really took off. So the storyline of the for-profit school had been driving this. Once I pulled that out and I got away from that, it was something I liked and something I had, much like that scene, it was something that I had clung to. And once I pulled that out, I was able to let the characters actually, because I had to pull about 40% of the novel out, I then had to fill it out. That was when I was really able to take those characters and let them be a little freer, I think, because I had those pages to fill out. And they were able to just sort of help me develop that story a little bit more. So I would say it was story first, then character, then story, then character. And then with a mystery novel, you do have to, you need to, you always want to make sure that there's tension and that there's forward momentum in that story. So you do have to be you have to be mindful of plot as you're developing it. Yes?
So did you pick Boston Somerville for a particular reason, or they just had to be somewhere?
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. So I picked it for a couple of reasons. The easiest reason is write what you know. I mean, they basically, I lived in Somerville I live in Roslindale now, but I lived in Somerville for a long time. And they basically live in the house next door to the one that I used to live in. It's an imaginary house, but that's the house I always imagine. I like Somerville because I think it pulls in a lot. It's an interesting place in Boston to look at. It's not the type of place that you're always going to read about when you read about Boston. It's in the news a little bit more now, but it's just, I think it's a nice, it has a nice mix of population. It's a great small city. There are interesting places. It's really near iconic places, so you can get to Harvard. You can get to Harvard Square really easily. You can get to downtown Boston really easily. I did set it in Boston. A lot of the story takes place on Beacon Hill. The family that Sam infiltrates is a very wealthy family that lives on Beacon Hill, which also is very iconic. But I like to play with class when I'm writing, so I thought it would be, it's interesting to, Boston is a place like everywhere where there are rich people, there are poor people, and there are everyone in between, and I sort of like to explore that. Another piece, the other reason why I like Boston is that in Boston, it's really easy to, I like New York too, but this is, what I'm about to say is not true of New York. In Boston, it's really easy to go from urban to relatively rural and isolated really quickly. It's a very diverse landscape here. There are lots of places that you can choose, and it's also really beautiful and iconic. So you're never gonna lose locations in the New England area. So I chose Boston because I know it well, and it was easy. It was easier. It was easy to do that. But I also chose Boston because it has a lot of character, and I really like it. So, yes.
When you're fleshing out characters, do you pull them from real life, or do you pull them from other novels that you've read or film, or where do you get your inspiration?
Sure. I would say characters, I said this today, all the characters in the story are me, and none of the characters are me, right? Because they all come out of me. I mean, I'm the one who's sitting there with them every day. So, like for instance, Hester, who's the main character, she really likes horror movies from the 80s. I really like horror movies from the 80s. So that was just like a little detail that I pulled for myself. I also like to hang around and watch the same movies all the time. Hester is an enormous, enormous slob. I am an enormous, enormous slob. It's almost pathological. But, like Hester does other things that I would never do. I mean, Hester is really not very responsible with this child in a way that I would never do. But, it helped further the plot. I was thinking about other things like Gabe. Gabe is a very, very lonely person. I'm not a lonely person, but I do understand loneliness, right? Everyone has had lonely moments in their lives. And so that is a piece, I called on that time in my life and put that into his character. I do try really hard not to base whole characters on whole people. Like I would never say, this is Tom. This is Tom, by the way. I would never say, this is Tom, and like call him, Tim. So, but I will I'll pull like little lines or something. Like if someone says something really clever, I'll often co-opt that and put that in there. Yeah. Yes.
This may be a one-word answer.
Oh God.
What has the title got to do with the town of Whitman?
Oh goodness. It could be nothing, but that's my dad right there, Jack Hill, and that's my mother, Betty Hill. My dad one day said to me, "Did you know that Whitman used to be called Little Comfort?" And I thought it was so funny. I mean, I just loved that name. I loved the irony of it. And I always thought to myself, my first book is going to be called Little Comfort. That's how it happened. Yep.
Is that true? Whitman was called Little Comfort?
Yes.
Yeah.
When?
Oh,
When it
before
was
it was South Avenue.
When it was first, when people first came down from Weymouth, it was called Little Comfort.
Wow, I never knew that.
It's a section of town that's still called Little Comfort.
Yeah,
If
it's
you
down
if you
out
look it
under
up
Washington
online,
Street.
it's up by Auburn Street, is it?
Yeah, down that way, down towards East Bridgewater.
Wow.
They got the little store there, the store.
Be darned. Okay. Learned
Yep.
something.
What about your grandmother being a librarian?
Oh, yes.
Is that a connection?
So my grandmother was my father's mother was the librarian here. Not, I don't think in this building, right?
Library, no, the library was in the town
Town
hall.
hall.
Yep.
He was a librarian for over 20 years.
Mm-hmm. So that was part of the influence of choosing librarian as a career so Hester Thursby is a librarian. Why did I choose librarian as a career? Everyone has to have a job, right? And I always think of mysteries as being about curious people asking questions and solving things. And so when I was trying to come up with the career, I kind of went through a bunch of different things. I thought about making her a psychologist for a while, but there are a lot of crime novels that have psychology at the center of them that do it really well, and I didn't think I would be able to do it as well. When it was going to be softer, when the story was going to be softer, I thought about making her a veterinarian, but I thought that kind of locked me into very specific types of stories. So then I just kind of was thinking about various people that I know. I thought about my father's mother, my grandmother, and I thought librarians. Librarians they're always solving problems. They're always going out there. Their clients come in with a problem or something that they need an answer to, and they find that. And I thought, let's just extend that to finding missing people and what trouble that could get people into.
Now, how did this librarian end up being so short?
Oh, sure. Yep. So Hester is 4'9" and 3/4 inches tall, and again, I like to write with contrast. So. One of the things that I wanted from her was that she was someone who went not undercover, she doesn't go undercover, but she goes, she has to follow people. And I wanted her to be someone who would have a lot of difficulty not being noticed. So I just kind of went through a list of things that, there are lots of things that would make that hard. You could have, purple hair or whatever. But I kind of went through the list and I thought, I didn't want it to be anything outlandish or anything, but I thought, okay, I'll just make her small. And my grandmother, who, my father's mother, was also, how tall was she? 5 feet tall?
Oh, she was about 5 feet or a little under.
Yep, maybe 4'11". So I sort of touched on that too. So, and then there is a scene in the, I wanted Hester too as a character to be someone who had to fight a little bit, fight for respect and fight for, to be taken seriously. And so, that was something that sort of came along with the decision to make her small, but she is someone who, people will try not to take her seriously as a person, and she says, no, take me seriously, and it's definitely a theme that goes through it. There's also a scene about 2/3 of the way through the book that had come to me very early in the drafting process. This is one of those things that could have gone out with the trash, but the scene, it was necessary, smallness was necessary for that scene, so that helped drive that decision as well. So now I'm stuck with it because it's a series. So she's not going to grow a foot.
So it's not going to take you 10 years for each one of these?
No. I just handed him the second one. I handed him the second one at the end. I'll tell you that writing a second book is a lot different than writing a first book. I just handed him the second one at the end of June, and I'm just finishing up the edits now. Yeah.
And then probably fall into that question, you may be other character who is very successful, very beautiful, and very tall.
Mm-hmm.
So is Wendy, yes.
Yep.
So is that also to be noticed, or because maybe the tallness made her life easier?
Oh, yeah. The tallness, it's funny because that's a shadow of the tallness is a shadow of when the book, it's funny, you're just making me realize this, is a shadow of when the book was a little bit lighter than it is now. Like, I played with that a lot. There still is some of this language, but I played a lot of language. She has really big hair in the novel, like not big hair, like 80s big hair, but she has a lot of hair, and it's always out of control. And that was like that hair, I mean, this is so stupid, but that hair was like a much bigger factor in the original drafts, and sort of what happened with that hair and the tallness and the hair and her physicality was much bigger. I wound up cutting out a lot of that, but you're making me remember that now.
Do you have a title for your second book?
I do. When we met, I didn't have one, right?
Do you want to tell us what it is?
Yeah. It's called The Missing Ones, and it comes out September of next year. Yeah, as long as I can get these edits done. Good. Anything else?
Do you read mysteries?
Oh gosh, yes. What do you like to read?
I like to read a lot of different things.
Yes. I mean, I would say my along with the Clark Rockefeller case, one of the things that really got me back into writing was this series by Kate Atkinson. She has a book that's coming out, I think it came out this week, but she wrote this series, the Jackson Brodie series. And there are 4 mystery novels in it. But what I really liked about them was she really took the structure of the mystery novel. They're mystery novels and they're literary too. They're just really good writing. But she took that structure of the mystery novel and just really turned it on its head. And she just kind of, she made it funny, and she made it very character driven, but also engaging, and like, there are crimes in there that happen, and the crimes are really interesting. And so I read that series, and that really made me excited. I like Louise Penny, she writes those stories that take place up in Canada. It's called Three Pines.
Right.
I think those are really beautiful, and I really love the humanity of those stories, which is something I tried to bring some humanity into this novel as well. I think she really writes about real people making real decisions and making, like, wrestling with moral decisions. So I think that's really interesting. A book that I come back to, which is not a mystery, but that I come back to a lot, is this book called The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by Muriel Spark. I really love what she does. She also breaks rules when she's writing, and she's able to what she really does well is she travels in time during the novel, so she can go from me talking to you right now to the past to the future, all within one scene, and it always makes a lot of sense. So.
We went to see Ian Rankin
Oh.
a couple of years ago, and that was his favorite story, was The Pride of Miss Jean Grey.
Oh my gosh, well, now when I see him, I'll have something to say. So I just went to this conference called BoucherCon, and it was in Florida this year, but it's like all the big mystery novelists go there, and it's like there's nothing like making yourself feel like nothing when you're when you're standing next to Laura Lippman, So, yeah.
So does the character, I would guess Sam, he's kind of a con man.
Uh-huh.
So are there con men in the next novel, or does it not move into some completely different?
No, I mean, one of the central questions in this novel, I think anyone who leaves this novel, they'll be asking themselves, where the hell is Daphne? Daphne is the little girl's mother and Morgan's twin sister. And so the next novel is really about answering some of those questions. And it takes place, I can tell you, the next novel takes place most of the action takes place on an island off the coast of Maine that's sort of based on, it's a fictional island. I decided to do fictional island. It's based on Monhegan Island. Have you ever been there? It's sort of a combination of Monhegan Island and also one of the islands off the coast of Portland, because I needed a police force, which Monhegan doesn't have. Hester goes there to further investigate some other things. Yep. Yes?
One last question. If this were to become adapted to film, who would you place in some of the central roles?
Oh, excellent question. I just had to answer this one, so when I'm drafting something, I try not to cast people, because you don't want to get that. Now I have this for Hester, but you try not to get. You don't want to have that image in your head of someone who everyone knows, or at least I don't. But I would. A couple things. I went through and cast the novel using both current day people and also classic actors. And now I'm forgetting her name. Who played Juno? Ellen Page. So I would cast Hester as Ellen Page. I would cast Morgan as Ryan O'Neal, but a young Ryan O'Neal. I would cast, Kate's only 3 years old, so it's sort of like, I don't know, Shirley Temple. So she does have curly hair. They have a dog named Waffles, who is a basset hound, and good luck finding any basset hound that will do what you ask it to do. And then Daphne, I would cast with someone like someone who's like got a little crazy in them. So like a young Sean Young would be a good one. And then Sam, I always say this, when I was drafting this, Sam is extremely handsome, but like extremely handsome is different for everyone, right? So I actually was really purposeful in not using too many descriptors of him as I was drafting, because I want you to fill, like as the reader, I want you to fill that in and decide what you want someone very good looking to look like. And then Gabe, do you know that guy Adam Driver who's in the Star Wars movies? He's like he seems a little off. I think he'd be a good one for Adam Driver, for Gabe. Yep. Yes.
Now, you brought New Hampshire into all this too.
Yep.
Why don't you talk about New Hampshire?
Oh, sure. I mean, I can talk. Part of the novel takes place up in New Hampshire. The backstory takes place in New Hampshire, and then some of the action, especially in the last third of the novel, takes place up in there. And again, I chose that because the novel takes place in the winter. The story takes place in the winter, and I wanted a setting that was very rural, where people could get in jeopardy very, very quickly. And so that seemed like a good place to choose. I like to play with class, so I chose one of the lakes up there. Just because, when you have a lake community up anywhere, when you have a summer community, you're going to have people who live there year round, and you're going to have people who come in from outside who, like in this day and age, likely have a lot of money, and that creates a nice, interesting little tension. Not like the whole book is about class tension or anything like that. But it's a good, for me, it's an interesting thing to sort of infuse the whole story with. So that's why I chose New Hampshire. And also, I love going to New Hampshire. So.
Well, yeah, I was just thinking that you were talking about you like to put your characters in, I don't know, some expensive places where they live, Castle of the Clouds.
Oh.
You can make up a place where somebody lived in something similar to that.
Yeah, yep.
I find you very fascinating, I really do. I was dragged here by a friend. When you say, what do you like? I like Clive Cussler. I like stories about shipwrecks. I like the last book I read was Setting the Hook. Can't remember who wrote it. I don't remember, but I remember the book. What they're diving on the Eudora and stuff like that. You're fascinating. I would get the book and I have a Kindle.
Oh, Kindles are fine.
But
Kindles
I
are
would
fine.
I would get the book and.
And you know what? The libraries are fine too. There are a lot of copies in the network here.
Very interesting.
Yep.
You really are. I'm glad I came.
Thank you. Thank you. Did you have a question?
That was my question.
Oh, okay.
Is it in the network?
Yeah, yep. So you know what? If you do read it and you get it from the library and you like it, do me a favor. Tell 2 friends that you like it. And that would be helpful to me.
Or give it to them for Christmas?
Yeah, that would be awesome too.
So where can we buy it?
Anywhere. Yeah, it's available everywhere. Yep. Yep.
Can you put in a lot of independent bookstores around?
Yeah, it's right now. It's everywhere. So it may not be in a couple months, but.
Hopefully.
Yep. So, any other questions? Thank you all for coming out on a Thursday night. It's Thursday night, right? Yeah, on a Thursday night to listen to me. This was really a pleasure. And let me know if you have questions. I have bookmarks up here if anyone would like to take one about the book.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.